Seaweed and Stingers, Episode 1, Harpin on Seals. Our board vice president actually came up with this title, which was very fitting given the recent news of an adult harp seal that was rescued on a beach in Hull this week. In this episode, Alex Megerle and I will be speaking with Dr. Andrea Bogomolni. Dr. Dre, as she is called, has an impressive research and conservation background, with much of her work focused on seals, as well as the interconnection between the health of our ocean ecosystems and our own personal well-being. We have been working hard to set up this interview with Andrea for a while, so please enjoy.
You can start if you want. My name is Alex Megerle. I am a science communicator. Mostly I write, but I occasionally will dabble with photos and videos. Right now I live in Mashpee, but I work in Woods Hole for the moment. I am a wash ashore, came here from New Jersey about 3 years ago, but I love it and I'm happy to have stuck around.
No, and that's awesome. And I met Alex when you did an article about the Papaneset Water Stewardship Alliance back was a year and a half ago.
Something like that. Yeah. Summer of 23, I think.
Yeah. And you did such a good job on that. I just want to say, I always, I haven't done a lot with reporters and people reporting on science, but and you did such a good job with that article. I was so psyched. And you followed up.
I'm glad. Thank you.
No, it was awesome. I was very, very appreciative of it, but thank you.
This is great to be here with you. I'm excited.
Thank you so much. And I know we've been trying to coordinate this interview for a year.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. So I'm Andrea Bogomolni. My friends call me Dre. So I always say that's why I got a doctorate degree, so I could be Dr. Dre. And it's very important. Very important. But I actually also am a wash ashore. I washed ashore 25 years ago. And I came out from California out to Woods Hole and just fell in love with it, doing my master's degree at the BU Marine program. And then since then, I've had many, many, many different hats. I consider myself a community scientist. That's what I like to identify myself as, but I also teach. I'm an artist. I have a day job at a foundation to help other people kind of figure out the whole funding landscape, and really just work on coexistence issues with seals is a big part of what I do and continue to do in that whole time period.
No, that's so awesome. And we first connected over seals about a year ago. I was on Papaneset Spit and a seal was sitting at the very end, and we get seals that pop in from time to time, but this little one was at the end, and I thought, oh, it's a harbor seal sitting there, and I was trying to write about it, and then you tell me it was a harp seal, and then I was so excited because I had never seen a harp seal at that area, and it was a juvenile harp seal, and it was great.
Yeah,
I learned so much.
Yeah, I was so excited to tell you that too. So the other hat is working to create this consortium group. It's the Northwest Atlantic Seal Research Consortium, and I always feel really I'm a nerd. I can't help it, and it was so exciting for me. I was like, no, it's not. It's a harp seal, but that's really cool.
I'm not gonna lie, I was psyched because I had never seen a harp seal. I had heard that occasionally a juvenile one stumbles down from the Arctic and can be found on some of the beaches on the Cape. Never saw one in Papaneset, not saying that they hadn't been there before, but no, it was great. And then I just ended up going down the rabbit hole of harp seal research for a couple of days there when I was reading all about it. I was like, this is awesome. It was very exciting. And I remember that when I was there too, there was definitely someone monitoring it from Papaneset Bay. So I think at least it had eyes keeping tabs on it and making sure it was safe too. It did not like the boat. So it was running away from it, scurrying up the beach, but it was definitely a cool experience. Awesome. All right.
So we jump into
We could jump into some of the questions if we want. We can kind of go through. I think we did the intro one. So, Alex, you are up.
Sounds good. So, Andrea, we have compiled a few questions just to get a better sense kind of who you are and the work that you do in the area. So you touched on this a little bit already, but to start, before we get into your science, I'm really curious to know how you came to be a scientist. How did you get into this field?
I love that. I think I think we know when we're like 5, right? What you're passionate about, and everybody kind of goes back to what they love when they were 5, or they should, I think.
Mm.
And I was always the kid that was like, but why? But why? And I'm still that kid that's like, but why? But why? And I think that's what led me to be a scientist. And I also have to say, I was definitely influenced by my family. So my dad is a scientist. And so I thought this was normal. This is what people did in their lives. They had a lab, they did science, they wrote grants. And then it was always a surprise when other parents of friends of mine, that's not what they did. But that was normal and it was exciting. So I went down that path of thinking I love animals. So I was like, I'm going to be a veterinarian, and realized, oh, no, I don't want to be a vet. I like answering questions, asking why, and trying to understand the natural world a lot more. And that led me to start doing all the degrees that you do to, become a scientist and focus on what we're doing to the environment, what we're doing to our oceans, and how what we do affects the animals and life on the planet. So that's what led me to be a scientist. I think it's just the love of the ocean, the love of asking questions, and helping other people to understand the natural world.
Absolutely. I think that last part you mentioned is super important and super valuable. Getting people to really be able to grasp the work that you're doing, I think is super fun and also really helpful in actually effectuating change in the world. So that's super cool. Thanks for telling us a bit about that. I know that you could talk about your research for a long time, and I would love to hear that. But for a short time span, can you dig into a little bit of the big questions that you're trying to answer? If you can condense it down at all, what are the things that keep you up at night, if you will?
It's a great way to say it, because so much keeps me up at night, and trying to really look at that, like, but why? Again, like, what's the big picture? It's how do we impact as humans the environment, I think, and the animals that are in it. That's what I think all the questions I've ever asked really are centered around. And so just a couple examples of what that means in my world, from just understanding the basics of how an animal lives is fundamental to that. So I have a long-term research project that's actually linked to the Cape, but not on the Cape. It's at the Isle of Shoals in Maine and New Hampshire. But the seals are out there that I'm doing this long-term study with, are the same seals that we find out on the Cape. And I work a lot with researchers on the Cape as well. And looking at marine mammals that are stranded or sick or injured is that connection as well. And so over the years, just trying to, what you do when you're 5, which is pay attention, right? Look at the animals, has really helped us to go further into that. Like, what is the health of the animal? How is it changing over time? How do we impact them? Looking at entanglement, contaminants, mercury, for instance. I collect seal poop. That's a great sample from these animals as well. And that tells us a lot about their health. And same thing on the Cape, working with seals, pups, gray seal pups, tell us a lot about the health of the environment, what's happening. And then kind of going from there, that like, okay, so we understand what's happening, what they're exposed to, but then so what? What does this mean? And that's brought me over the years looking at oceans and human health work. So how does the connection between ocean health, human health, and animal health come together? And really focusing on what stressors might be out in the environment that we may not be paying attention to. And I always say, you probably don't know how much mercury you have, or PCBs or PFAS, or whatever you want to know, but we can find out in a seal, and we can know what's actually in the environment. So it's a great question to pose to people. It's like, do you know what you have? Probably not, but we can figure that out with these animals. And I'd say the last part that's really important to me is the link between science and policy and communication. That's the other link that science needs to do more of. And that brings us to the social sciences and how we fit humans into the world of science as well. So hopefully I made that a little more compact than 25 years. That's, I think, sums it up right there.
I think that was a great summary.
Absolutely. And that communication piece is just so important today, because I think historically, when you think of science, there's been such a separation when you have researchers and they're doing some really great work, but then how do you communicate that to the general public, and then to towns and the state and the policymakers who then need to implement the changes in order to, help the environment, and based on the findings of these scientists. And I think today more than ever, we're trying to really bridge that gap. I remember going to grad school at UMass Boston, and one of the classes that we were required to take was science communication.
Awesome.
And that was one of the environmental science master degree classes, because of just that disconnect and the importance of science and policy in general, which absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
So important.
You already touched on it a little bit, but we also wanted to ask you specifically about your connections to the Cape. Of course, you mentioned you live here, and there is some overlap in the seal species that you study up in Maine versus the ones that are here. But can you talk a bit more about how Cape Cod itself and its ecosystem and animal inhabitants are involved in your research?
Absolutely. They're very much involved, not just animals on the beach, but what happens to them. So the connection between what are seals doing from how a seal is stranded, which is how my marine mammal career started, was really looking at marine mammals stranded on Cape Cod through the Cape Cod Stranding Network. So very directly related. Nice. Yeah. Very directly related, gave me a sense of what is happening in this greater environment, which is what led me to ask more questions. Well, what about their health? How are they doing? Which then I got my boss, who was great, booted me out. And he's like, go get yourself a degree so you can write your own grants and ask your own questions. Come back. Which is what I did. I never left. I left and came back. And the other part of that, again, is that connection to understanding the threats to them. So entanglement as well. I do a lot of work still. My research that I do right now focuses on bycatch and entanglement. So trying to work at that coexistence level, and also science level of how do you mitigate these things that are happening while we're sustainably trying to use the resources around us. So working with fishermen, looking at operational interactions with fishing gear, understanding where these animals go and what they eat, all those things that you pay attention to over the years become so important, so that we can try and mitigate the issue itself, help fishermen, help seals, and coexist. So that's a big part of my work, is still understanding what happens to these animals, how this actually occurs, and what we can do to stop it from happening. It's in the United States, the animal species that has the highest bycatch rate numbers are gray seals, and those gray seals are in the U.S. and right off of the Cape and Chatham. So that's a really big conservation issue that we face. And then the other is the success story, which is part of the science, where these seals were bounty hunted to near extinction. They were extirpated because of this perception of competition with fisheries. And so now we're in this world where for many generations, people never saw them. So that's the other challenge research. And that's the human dimension side, is communicating and also figuring out what people think about these animals in this new reality where we have a species that's come back. So it's a great success, but now what is also part of the science and how we operate, what we study, what our priorities are, what they're eating is always what I'm studying, because everybody wants to know. Interaction with sharks, really big on Cape Cod. So I work on that as well. So lots of the how do they live? Where do they go? How do people interact with these animals now is a big part of my life on Cape Cod.
That's
really
a great interesting answer. No, absolutely. One thing I think a couple of years ago in Mashpee, so Mashpee gets the gray seals, once they leave Nantucket, they somewhat stumble around Nantucket Sound and they, meander their way out to the outer Cape, but they love to stop at South Cape Beach in Mashpee at the bend going into Papaneset and hang out there for about a month. And they'll congregate, and it's about 20 to 30 when they're at their max. But then when they meet, disperse and start to leave there, one of the problems they have in Papaneset is that they go along the buoy line. And if they're there in May and June, when everybody comes back, there's been a lot of boat collisions over the last 2 years because, the seals at the buoy line, usually there's fish also migrating through that area. And there's been a couple collisions, which they've been trying to put out a lot of educational material from Mashpee DNR about watch out for seals and give people alerts. But that's definitely, I think, in the last couple of years, I wouldn't want to say a new thing, but like one of the newer hazards that people really need to look out for are, hey, just be conscious that the seals are also here and they are moving around as kind of at the same time you guys are all coming back with the boats and the jet skis and everything.
Yeah, that's great that there's awareness and that there's a push to actually just keep track of it. It's the best thing you can possibly do is just raise that awareness. And
no, absolutely.
It's interesting that you talk about just knowing what's out there, because I've lived on the Cape for, like I said, roughly 3 years, and I'm a fairly outdoorsy person, I would like to think, and I don't know if I've ever even seen a seal. So well, I would love that to change that.
You're gonna have to come with me in April. We'll go to South Cape and I'll take you to the bend.
Oh, perfect. All right.
No, absolutely.
We're gonna get me some seals. But on that note, you mentioned the gray seals. There are a few species in Massachusetts, waters, right? Some are here year round and some are visitors. Can you talk a bit more about the different species in the local waters?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are fortunate to have 2 species that we can see. I wouldn't say year round. Gray seals, we can kind of see year round now. They're hanging out. And harbor seals. So harbor seals are here a lot of the time as well. You'll see them in the fall. Then they'll kind of go away. They'll come back again in the springtime towards the summer. So it kind of like flips a little bit. We used to flip where you would have gray seals and harbor seals. Now we just get gray seals pretty much year round on parts of the Cape. And that's the 2 species that you're more likely to see. And I always tell people the harbor seal looks like a little Cocker Spaniel. It's kind of cute and dainty, but it is compared to a gray seal, which also are called horse heads. And I was telling people Helicoris crapus means that's their name. It's hook-nosed sea pig. So very beautiful name that they have. Much bigger, 3-4 times the size. The males can get to 800 pounds. So you can tell the difference between the adults. The younger ones are hard. And then to the point of how we met and started talking, Nicole, there's harp seals, and harp seals are here in the winter. There's also hooded seals. Harp seals are way more common. I love seeing hooded seals. They're cool. They look like little ETs. They've got big eyes. Because we usually the younger age class, which look like the harp seal looks like a harbor seal. Small. And then when they get large as an adult, they get this beautiful harp pattern on their back. So they're big white. They look like a cow, kind of. They're big and white with black on them. But when they're younger, those young of the year age classes or small juveniles are very confusing with their harbor seal. And then, the hooded seal, knock on wood, maybe we'll get them, but we don't usually get adults. And hooded seals are super cool as adults. They have this like air sac in their nose. It's super cold spread. Apparently the females are attracted to it in the males. But what we see are what we call the bluebacks, and these little guys that are super unique. They're like this beautiful gray blue color. So they stand out. If you see one, I think you'd know. But those are the 4 we get. I'm still waiting for a walrus to make it down. That's my dream. That one day. They used to be here ages ago. But yeah, today we have those 4.
And those
Awesome.
are usually, so when the ones that come down from the Arctic, they usually, as you kind of mentioned, the younger ones who are trying to stake it out on their own almost, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, when we get those really, really big ice years or snow, like those years where there's been like one storm after the other, it's their habitat. It's cold. It's what they're on. It's ice and snow. So it makes sense. And there's I think there's like 7 or 8 million of them. I can't remember, up in the Arctic. So they pup, they make their way down, and then they disperse. And so we end up getting them, especially in those winters that look like the Arctic. So keep your eye for that. But we do get adults as well. And the issue that we have always with keeping an eye on them and why it's so important and why calling them in is important is the ice seals need ice. But if there's sand or rocks, they'll start eating the sand and rocks, and that can actually be really bad for them. So it's good, even if it looks like it's okay, to call it into a stranding network to be like, I think it might be eating some sand. And then knowing what to do right away can save the animal's life, actually. So yeah, keeping tabs on what species is here can help those animals out a lot.
No, that's great advice too. And we'll actually be touching on that in a couple more questions about what to do if you see a seal, but we'll definitely get to that piece.
Definitely. For people who are not biologists or ecologists, what kind of role do seals play in an ecosystem? Like, what are they eating? What are they eaten by? What sort of actions do they play in that web?
Some of my favorite questions to answer, because I think it's amazing that we're in a time here in the waters that we're in to be able to answer those questions, because we couldn't answer those questions even 2 decades ago because they weren't here.
Wow.
So it's really exciting when people ask that question to first say, we're still learning what their entire role is in a system. Because they're establishing their role again, but they are mesopredators to start. Like, that's their ecological sort of where they fit. You know, people always talk about top predators, and we're so lucky to have had protections both on white sharks and gray seals and harbor seals. And over the last some of them not even 50 years, just 30 years for white sharks back in like the late 90s. And see those populations come back. So now we can say we actually have top predators and mesopredators again that should be here in a healthy ecosystem. One thing that is so important to note about that is mesopredators are really important for consuming fish that can reproduce really quickly, or species that might be fast growing. And that's the role of a mesopredator, is sort of that I'm going to consume those animals. So people always say the seals are eating all the fish. And I go, actually, they're not eating all the fish. They're eating the ones that are usually most abundant, easy to catch. They'll be eating things like stripers and cod and those things as well. But their primary diet, so my friend says the meat and potatoes of their diet are these small fish, forage fish. So menhaden, flatfish, sandlands, things that are in abundance. That's their main part of their diet. And hake is a really fast growing fish that is very voracious and eats other little baby fish. So that's what people are learning, especially in areas where seals have come back a little more, I don't want to say quickly or before. So in the West Coast, there's been time for them to come back after hunting due to a lot of different reasons. So here it's just starting that we're trying to understand that and can see it. And then of course we have our white sharks. So the white shark is older, so they don't start eating seals until they're way big. Like I think it's past like 12, 13 feet. That's when marine mammals, when they're smaller, they're eating fish, not marine mammals. So that's the point of their life where, the marine mammals, even, porpoise, dead whales, seals become important in their diet. And we know that that's an incredible link that's happening off our waters right now that is coming back, that was here for a long time and we took it away as humans and now we see it again. The other really important role that I think is so cool and exciting, I was saying I study poop or I collect poop and it tells us all these different things, is there's been studies even on the Cape Cod National Seashore that shows that the nutrients that are left behind actually help establish plant growth. And that was actually done by a student, I think, at the MBL who did that research, showing how the nutrients actually add to the health of plants. And that's what's been seen in this great study on Sable Island, right off Canada, where there's horses, seals, and researchers. That's about it. And people are trying to figure out, like, how are the horses doing so well? Like, there's nothing out there. And it turns out the seals, the nutrients they leave behind is actually the nutrients that are helping the plants grow, and the plants are what are allowing the horses to survive. And on the Cape, the thought is that those plants are actually keeping the dunes in place. So those are those really cool roles that they play. And then the last one that is, I get so excited, is when a seal dies and is on the beach, it's still part of the system and providing nutrients to seabirds, to plovers, to hate to say it, but, there's little bugs that grow on dead things, right? With little maggots and things. That's food. So the importance of seals in the ecosystem is something I just think is so exciting because it's this area of research that there's so much we still need to know about too. Can you tell I get excited about it?
I can, and now I'm excited about it too.
I know, this is cool. And it's so interesting you said that because 2 years ago in Papaneset, they believe they had about 5 or so seals that had boat strikes that washed in. They went necropsied, and the remains of the seal were left behind on the beach. And a lot of people, when I got asked several times, can you contact somebody to have the seal removed? And it's that you leave the seal. And I had wondered, I wonder why the seal was being left. But it was funny because the seal, between birds, insects,
coyotes,
everything. The seal was gone within 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Again, like going back to, it's really good to pay attention and just watch and see what nature does without us sort of getting in the way. It really helps us. It really helps.
No, it does. It was a big nature lesson, I think, for everybody on the beach too. Because you watched it, but I thought it was very interesting because it's like you saw the process start to finish.
It's really cool.
It was cool.
Like a miniature version of, what do they call it? When a whale dies, whale fall. It becomes this big kind of source of energy in the deep sea. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up too, because that research is so cool that people have studied that and spent the time trying to understand it and the value of animals, whether they're, they die in the ecosystem, they're there, they have an intrinsic value that is not just economic, right? But to some people, that's how it has to be explained, is this like, what's the economic value of the worth of this thing in the environment? And just thinking about whale falls and people trying to explain like carbon sequestration. And does that make people understand? It's super cool that IMF, the International Monetary Fund, actually put a value on the great whales to see if that could help people kind of relate to, why do we care? How is this valuable? And dead whales are included in that. Like, what is the value of whales and whale falls? And the same thing goes for seals. Like they're part of that environment that we rarely think about as being a value to our system intrinsically. And then to some people trying to explain, okay, well, this might be the economic way you can look at it too.
That's super interesting. You mentioned a little bit on this one as well before my next question, and it's a huge topic that we don't have time to get into intensely, but can you talk a little bit more about how ocean health impacts human health?
Yeah, that's a That's like a whole 3-hour.
Yeah.
It's a dissertation.
But in so many ways, I think over the years, the part that really stands out are on multiple levels. And I mean, you could do it as like a what contaminants are there? How does this impact like the cell structure, whatever? That's one part. To me, the thing I think I've learned more than anything is it impacts our food system, what we think about in our health and what we're exposed to, how we live our lives, like as I was saying, like these intrinsic values. And then also, how does that impact us when we are in the ocean? We are surrounded by it. So it's, impacting us directly. We consume from it. Our livelihoods depend on it. And that's part of our health as well. And so when we start thinking about climate change or the impacts of runoff, I mean, that's a huge issue on the Cape, right? What does that do to the system? How does it change things? Does it cause algal blooms? And everything that goes into the ocean comes back to us. It's like a boomerang. And that impacts not just the cell structure of our being, but the well-being of our people who harvest from the oceans, the livelihoods of those people as well. Our culture keepers, our culture bearers, and how important that is as well, not to forget that part as well. A lot of what we are exposed to or act upon as people, especially at that coastal interface, the ocean tells us what we need to be worried about or pay attention to. And the more like direct way, like thinking of research and pipettes, right? Like in that more like research framework, we again don't know in a human, say, how much you might be exposed to mercury. We know through what we're eating, we can measure that, we can look at it. And, she's my idol, Rachel Carson, right? She's amazing of just trying to figure out what's going into our oceans, how it's affected, how that affects us. It's a way to tell the story about it too, I think, that people listen to more than anything. And I think that's really special that I always say I hesitate. I don't know if it's sad or just the way humans are, but sometimes it has a bigger impact if you start telling people about this is affecting a dolphin or this is affecting a certain species. And that's the way you get attention and ocean stewardship to build as well. So that connection between ocean health and human health and animal health, we call it One Health, where it's all connected, that story that's put together so that we can understand how everything functions together without it just being one or the other. So that's the other important piece too. So yeah, again, it's been this really amazing journey to go from what's that molecule to what are people thinking as science. And those are all really important parts of that spectrum of understanding why ocean and human health together are so important.
No, that was very interesting. That was so good.
It's a big question, so thanks for giving it a great summary.
I have these pictures in my head. I'm like, can I show you the graphs?
Yeah.
No, but you're absolutely right. And I think also, as you mentioned, the emotional connection is one of the important ones that you also have to make too with people. There's definitely, we have you think of the health and the physical health and that, but then the mental health piece, the emotional connection that you make to, hey, I value this. What are your values? And as residents on the Cape, our values are so closely tied to the ocean, and 100%. Trying to bring that back full circle.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly it. And I couldn't have said it any better. That was perfect.
That leads super nicely into our next question, changing tacks a little bit for the last part of our conversation. Can you talk about what citizen science is and how you use it?
Sure. I would say, I have to say two things. So it's more of a making sure it's clear. So there's citizen science and community science, which are two different things. And I always like to bring that up because sometimes people think they're the same thing and they're not. So I do both. And so community science is answering the questions of your community. So as a researcher, so ingrained to be like, I have this question, I'm going to find the answer and get a grant and find some colleagues and we're going to work on it. Community science is more of, again, it's like that what you do in year 5. Let me pay attention to what's happening and talking to people and having discussions with people outside of science often who are like, I saw this like bird and it comes back to this tree every single year, but only during this one moon cycle. Why is that? Can you help me understand what's happening? Mm-hmm. And that's when you work together to say, well, I've got these research methods. We can try and figure out what that might mean. And that's what I do with bycatch remediation, is working with fishermen to answer their questions. How do I keep a seal out of a net? Why is it targeting this one species? Is it am I going to get sick if I get bit? So I do a lot of work in kind of like that public health zoonotic range in the past and trying to explain that in a way that's understandable to all, and then figure out how do we answer this question together. That's community science. Citizen science, I use a lot with seals, identification of individuals. That's a great way to describe a citizen science project I do and work with. There's a program called Seal Codex. It's from WildMe, where citizen scientists can go and report animals that they see. And we started doing that as well at Hui, where I used to work, and it was called the Marine Animal Identification Network. And now the powers are so great with like all the technology that it's kind of obsolete now, but it's the same premise. And now it's built bigger and sort of handed over to an amazing organization that does this. That's what they do, so that people can report animals. And then the hope is to connect the dots of where these seals are going, what habitat. How far do they go? Are they the same seals that are using habitat up in Maine, Cape Cod, Long Island? And we can match them by their spot patterns. And that's the really cool thing about seals, especially harbor seals and gray seals that we have commonly. It's they don't lose their patterns over time. They have the same pattern throughout their whole life. So we've seen some seals 12 years in a row. If you go to the Chatham Fish Pier every summer, you'll see the same seals. They all have somebody's named them, I assure you. In different organizations, they have all kinds of fun names, but we know who they are, or we know which seal is which, and that helps us understand their lives. And that's how we know some animals can live 40 years, is brands and tags that have been put on these animals. So if the brands or the tags are recited, that's another way that citizen science has been incredibly important to understanding where these are from. One of the best, I don't even know if I was alive at the time. It was a long time ago. But one of the first indicators that gray seals were coming back to the Cape was somebody found a seal that had a brand, so a number on its back, and the number was put on at Sable Island in Canada. And it was the first seals to come back. We know they came from Sable Island because of the number. So that was like the 1990s first kind of seal citizen science project, was paying attention to these numbers. But that's how I am involved in citizen science and really trying to keep track of where these animals go. My favorite is Mr. T. I love telling people that, my favorite seal, T on the side. And it's a seal that was seen for 12 years straight. So following Mr. T and it being a way to connect to people about the importance of seals. Why do we care about them? I mean, Mr. T, come on.
Right.
Where is Mr. Is awesome. Mr. T still being tracked?
I haven't seen him in 2 years. I'm a little worried. But I have to say, a pretty old, big male gray seal. So I have a feeling he's lived a pretty good life if he's not there anymore. But I'm hoping he appears again.
That's still very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining citizen versus community science, because I don't know if I had ever thought about the difference between those two things. But it is a significant one. So thanks for breaking it down. Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about naming the seals too, because I do think that's an interesting way to build that empathy. You talked before about maybe people will care more about an issue if you say, oh, it's impacting a dolphin, it's impacting a seal, something that people maybe find cute or attractive in some way. And I don't know, I feel like naming things gives almost a sense of kinship with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a battle in the science world, right? Are you allowed to have connection, feelings? I wouldn't say empathy. I think we all have empathy, more of the people say you're anthropomorphizing, or, why are you doing that?
Mhm.
And I think there's a movement really that's built of saying we can't keep doing that. I mean, to be objective is, of course, the ultimate goal, but to connect in our world where conservation is so critical, we have to have people connect. And that value, as you said, like building that empathy is such an important part of the conservation successes that we've had, and a way for people to understand their role in the system as well, that they are a part of this system as much as those animals are.
It's a really interesting balance.
I think it's so important because that's almost the bridge between the science world and the general public world, where you really do need to bridge that gap. And how do you bridge that gap? Well, it's kind of like just shared feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always say, I love that. Yeah, it's shared feelings. I love that. And the best way to bring people together is to find that common thread or that connection. And so you'll be like, oh, you named a seal. Oh my God, I can't believe it. But if you're talking about the seal while having dinner together or a cup of coffee together, that part's really important too. And bringing people together and having conversations is a really big part of what needs to happen more between science and the public. And I think it's what's so amazing to see more and more that people understand that as their science cafes and talk at this restaurant, or, those are those spaces that these conversations have to be in. They can't be happening just in a big hall someplace. It's talking about what matters to people where we are all at and enjoy being too.
No, absolutely. It's almost taking, when you had science and, you go to a science conference and you go and you listen to the research and the presentations, and those are awesome and so informative, but the people who go there, it's all the science community just meeting up. So it's then, okay, so this research is great and awesome and so important. How do you bring it outside of that? And it is that conversation piece, as you said.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear about my pipetting for like 15 years. Or sometimes they want to hear about cutting up whales. That's the other part of my life, but that's never good dinner conversation. So
Keep that one out of the cafes, maybe.
Right.
That's so funny. No, absolutely.
On the topic of just having conversations and learning more, how can people, A, learn more about what it is that you do, and B, maybe get involved in what you do somehow? Maybe that citizen science side of things we talked about.
Yeah, I love absolutely trying to get people where they feel passionate about in whatever way. So I was taught, pick up the phone, just call somebody. What is it that you admire in somebody, and talk to them? So number one, like that's so important, of making scientists tangible or, real, of just talk to people. Number one, and see what those areas of interest are, like in terms of like somebody who's younger looking for a mentor, or where do I fit and how do I get involved, if it's research or science. If it's in community, it's really like the citizen science way to go. On the Cape, we are so lucky because there's so many great organizations. It's amazing. So you can pick your species of choice and your issue and find amazing nonprofits and organizations that need volunteers. Would love for marine mammals in particular. There's the IFA, the International Fund for Animal Welfare. They're the designated marine mammal stranding response group. If you're on the vineyard, I do believe it's the tribe, it's a Kina tribe that has the jurisdiction. So that's still the Cape, right? Cape and Islands. And there are so many ways to kind of integrate in that way. There's the whale watches that happen in the summer all over. Those are great ways to even get involved and learn more, and just learn and see what's out there. You still need to go see seals, right? Where do you go see seals? Go on some seal. Those are incredible ways to get involved. And I'd also say, if there's opportunities to, how do I say it? Like put yourself where you want to be. Like if there's something that interests you, just ask. It's one of the things I wish I did when I was younger, was just ask. I was always so afraid to ask, or I don't want to, bother anybody, or, oh, it's not for me. That's so different. Just talk to people. They're so willing to share their experiences. The White Shark Conservancy does so much great outreach and education. Another great resource. We work together in the seal world with the white shark world, so we always communicate together. So another fabulous resource on the Cape there in Chatham. And I do think there are seal tours that go out of Buzzards Bay through the Buzzards Bay Coalition too. So there's multiple ways that you can get out and see what's out there, and that I think is probably the most accessible to anybody to get involved. Is go see them, go take a tour, go see the mammals, go see the seals. Oh, and the Chatham.
I'm excited
too. Can't forget that. Yeah, the Chatham Fish Pier is a great place to go. Take a drive. I would say Cape Cod is one small town, so go. It's the most accessible place that you can go and see seals. You just stand at the pier and they're there, so you don't have to go far. So all you need is to get in a car and go drive and park, and then you can go see seals that way too. It's pretty. You don't need a beach pass. You don't need anything like that.
Going to be making some trips to Chatham soon, I think.
Yeah, and the National Seashore, go to and High Head, and there's the seal education team through the national park that we help, get information to, and that program's amazing out there too. So many seals everywhere.
That's such a cool part of the Cape too, because even though it's not that much further away than Mashpee, it's just such a different ecosystem when you head out to that outer arm, because I did turtle rescue out there with the Mass Audubon a couple of years ago. And I go, oh, wow, it's the open ocean.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah, and you can see the seals just go back and forth. And yeah, it's spectacular.
High recommendations.
Our last question for you is a practical one. We've touched on it a couple times throughout the conversation, but if someone were to encounter a seal on the beach, what should they do?
Oh, thanks for asking that too. So if there is a seal, do not approach it. Do not try and pick it up. Don't try and pet it. Leave it be, and admire from afar. And if you're not sure if it's alive or dead, you're not quite sure what's happening. We were always taught jingle some keys or see if it's, alert. It's a good thing to know if it's not alive or alive. It's a good start. And if you think it's injured or needs assistance, call IFA, the International Fund for Animal Welfare. They're the Marine Mammal Stranding Response Group on the Cape. And they can assess. They'll have volunteers throughout the Cape, so plenty in Mashpee too, just will go out and assess. And if it's in an area of lots of people and tourists, they'll put a sign sometimes out there to just let people know, please stay 150 feet away from this animal, let it rest. So that's what you can do. I mean, the best thing to do is, if you're not sure, don't get too close. Call IFA. They will let you know, and either let you know what to do or send a volunteer out there to assist and say to you, don't get near it. They have teeth. They carry pathogens. So, remember that. And keep your dogs away. That's a really important thing to remember as well. If a seal did have a pathogen or disease, or is a high probability, it's something that could go to your dogs because they're very similar. So that's a good piece of advice too. Don't let your dog go up and sniff seals, not dead or alive. Don't do it. But yeah, number one, call IFA. Yes, call their hotline. It's monitored 24/7. They have people all the time that have the phone. So anytime. They probably hate me saying that, but they are.
No, but it's definitely good to know, because I think that's one of the more, especially over the last couple of years, where we have seen more gray seals that drift in the spring and, hop onto the beach and take a nap. And then you have, people who come back to the beach and they go, oh no, we don't know what to do because it's sitting there. And then they're not sure. And sometimes it's one of the younger ones who had dispersed from the winter breeding season and then, is trying to find their way, kind of exploring the Cape per se.
Yeah,
and found a nice place to take a nap.
Yeah, they need. So thank you for that. They need to nap. So that's the thing I got to say, because I think I take it for granted that's just normal. But seals rest on beaches. They don't need to water. They swim for hundreds of miles. They're tired. They ate too much and they need to take a nap. Like they do. They remind me of my dogs. They like to nap. They spend a lot of time doing that, and it's really important for them to be able to recover that energy and be able to go back out in these cold waters and do what they do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again so much for doing this. It was great to hear more about what you do. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you were hoping we would, or anything that you want to add?
Well, this was great. I just have to say that first. That's what I have to add. But I'm so glad that you're doing this, and thank you for reaching out. I think it's so important for people to know about, the species that, as you said, you've been here for 3 years and you've actually never seen one. And the misinformation that is so prevalent is what is incredibly, unfortunately, catchy and what gets picked up by storytelling, which we're trying to change. So 2 things I would share is that there's an exhibit a few of us put together, 4 of us. It's called Seals in Society. It's a traveling exhibit. It's where is it now? It's going up and down the coast. It's been like 3 years where it's been traveling, but there's a website as well. It's called Seals in Society that you can check out. And it's a perspective from not just the time of the bounties, but how are these animals culturally relevant in the past and today to our native people in Mashpee? And so there's a perspective from not just the Western culture side and our beginning of the story in 1800, but what is the importance and significance and kinship of these animals going back 12,000 years to today. And that's a really great resource for people to learn about seals. And we have 13 panels, and the information on those panels is on that website. And the other resource that's really important is the Northwest Atlantic Seal Research Consortium, the website sealconsortium.org. And that's tied to, it used to be with WHOI, and now it's with the UMass Boston School for the Environment. So that's our home. And that's another amazing resource to share for people to get info. And the other is the Northeast Fisheries Science Center has a seal ecology group. And then the Center for Coastal Studies has the seal research program as well. So those are all fabulous, fantastic places to find information to combat misinformation. And it's really important to remember that their story goes back way before ours, right? About 12,000 years or more. And to honor and respect that, there's a lot to learn and a lot we still don't know, and stories we're still finding out. So go check that out. Find your resources, ask questions, and I'm always happy to answer anything that might be questionable or could this be true? Ask me always.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
I'll put all these links, and I'll put them on our social media pages for people to definitely check it out. I got them all here. This is awesome.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm honored to be with you both and to be able to share.
No, and thank you so much for taking the time. I know that, like I said, we were planning this for a little while, but I was very excited to speak with you, especially after last year, and I learned so much just from a very brief interaction. I really want to speak to her. Oh. So very excited. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. It was a pleasure speaking with Andrea, and we hope you learned some new information from the interview. Links to the organizations and work Andrea mentioned will be available on our social media pages as well as our website. As late winter comes to a close and more seals tend to disperse, do remember to keep yourselves and your pets at least 150 feet away from any seal you may encounter and observe them at a distance. While many seals on beaches are resting, if you encounter a seal that appears to be distressed or injured, please contact the International Fund for Animal Welfare's Marine Mammal Stranding Hotline at 508-743-9548.
tomorrow starts today.